Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of Never Too Old for YA. Today we'll be discussing chapters 8 through 14 in Eve Bunting's novel, A Sudden Silence. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Never the Number 2 Old for YA. This podcast is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and iHeartRadio, along with YouTube and Facebook.
Hey, Kels.
Hey, Mel.
So last week we left off kind of wondering where this book was going to go because there wasn't a lot left and it was halfway through the book already. Boy, did it get juicy.
It really did.
It was so good. I mean, okay. So I was very skeptical last time we left Jesse because Jesse was torn between what's going on and like the investigation of like his brother's death, but also very involved with Chloe too. So in the last half of the book, it was kind of a shock to me. And like, I don't know if you thought this, but I feel like he's more in it for Chloe than he was trying to find who killed his brother, because basically we find out that the guy with the black sweatshirt and the white logo in the back, they find out who he is. So Chloe and Jesse are at this surf competition, not together, but they're both there. And Jesse's like has binoculars, like trying to find Chloe. He's trying so hard to be in this girl's life, but he's also saying like, no, I'm trying harder not to be with her, not to have anything to do with her. To me, it was kind of sad because your brother just died and like you were very involved with your brother and it seems like your whole family was tight-knit, and now here comes Chloe and you're just like, oh yeah, my brother died, but there's this really hot girl and she's super interesting and I need to figure that out while also doing something very important, probably the most important thing, finding who killed my brother.
Yeah, I feel like he got way too invested in spending time with Chloe and he got kind of infatuated with her. And yeah, I think like you said, it seemed after a while, it seemed like he was more interested in spending time with Chloe than finding the guy who killed his brother.
And then that brings us to the competition again. So there's this big fight that breaks out. Jesse thinks that Chloe's involved because he doesn't see her through the binoculars anymore. But Chloe is still where she was at and nothing was wrong with her. She did cut her foot, though. So he rushed to her and basically took her to the ER just to make sure everything was okay. So then while they were in the ER, the nurse kind of goes, oh, you know, boyfriends aren't allowed. And they kind of looked at each other like, what do we say here? And then while all of this is going on, Jesse's also still thinking about the guy in the black jacket. And he also has Chloe thinking about him. So on the way back, Jesse's taking Chloe back home. So they're driving past this restaurant called The Windmill. And who does Jesse see in the window?
So yeah, he sees the guy that still in the same jacket again. He sees the guy with the black jacket and he's like, that's the guy. He's here. So he goes and like chases him down and tackles him and confronts him about, you know, Bry's death. And he was like, well, you know, I don't know if I killed your brother. I don't know. Like, I don't remember anything. Telling Jesse how he came home one night and was so drunk that he parked his car in the middle of the street and had to go move it in the morning when he woke up. Like, he's like, you know, all kinds of crazy stuff happens to me when I'm drunk and I don't remember how it went or how I got there or anything.
Right. So he didn't know what was going on. He didn't know if he did it or not. That's why we saw him kind of scramble away from the scene of the crime after the fact. So finally, he's talking to Jesse and Jesse comes to the conclusion like, okay, this guy didn't do it. But who did? So he still ends up taking Chloe back home. And while they're there, Chloe's parents are on the way out to go to this fancy dinner. So it's just Jesse and Chloe at the house for a little while. Chloe's on painkillers, so they don't spend that much time together, but they end up kissing each other. And Jesse's super conflicted about it. Like, he very, like, invested in this non-existing relationship. And I think that she thinks something's going to happen too. But he's basically telling her, like, no, Bry had you first, like you're Bry's girl or whatever. And she's like, but I didn't like him that way. Like, he was a really cool guy and I knew I let him on, but like I didn't like him that way. So then Chloe's parents get home. Jesse leaves to his car. It hit him he had an epiphany and he was like, wait a minute, that car looks so familiar.
He notices Mr. Eichler's car, Chloe's dad's car, and actually it's when another car passes and the headlights kind of light up the back of the car real quick, and he notices like the symbol again that he saw on the back of the car, and it turns out to be like the Volvo symbol, like a circle with a V in the middle of it on the mud guards of the car, and the back of the car is rounded, like he remembered the car that hit Bry was rounded in the back. He realizes that it was Mr. Eichler's car that hit Bry. So at first he's thinking it was Chloe's dad that hit him. He knows it was one of the Eichlers. He knows it was somebody from the Eichler house that hit him in that car. And there's even like a little dent on the hood, like a really small dent because cars were made better. This is a car from like the 60s and cars were made better back then. So it didn't make as much of an impact on the car itself from Bry hitting the hood. So he realizes that it was that car. And then later he finds Soubug again and and asks him, like, what did you see that night? And finally Soubug tells him that it was a woman in the car and he saw her get out and she had like an ankle chain on her ankle, and Mrs. Eichler always wears an ankle chain. So Jesse puts two and two together that it was her, and he asks Soubug, was she by herself? Was there someone else in the car? Was she driving? And Soubug tells Jesse, yeah, she was driving and there was nobody else in the car. So he comes to the conclusion that Mrs. Eichler was the one who hit Bry and kept going. And then he talks to Chloe about it because he wants to let her know that it was her mom who did it before she finds out from the cops, because he decides, yeah, of course, that he's going to tell the cops what happened so that, Mrs. Eichler can be brought to justice. And so he tells Chloe first so that she knows already and has a heads up so that when the cops come, it's not going to be a surprise to her. And she is telling him all kinds of crazy stuff about her mom, that she is like an alcoholic, and well, obviously if she was that drunk and got in a hit and run, and that it's not the first time she's driven drunk, and that she's the type of drunk that, because her family knows about her drinking problem and they try not to let her drink or not to let her drink too much, she'll hide alcohol. And Chloe tells him, we found alcohol all over the place, like the most unlikely places you could think of, and she'll drink in secret. And she said that that when they lived in Palo Alto, that her mom was in the garage in the car and plowed through the back wall of the garage thinking that the car was in reverse and it was in drive. So she went forward instead of backwards and plowed through the wall of the garage into the house. Like, just all kinds of crazy stuff has happened with her mom and drinking. So Chloe's kind of not surprised by it. Like, she's super sad and everything, and she can't believe that her mom, has sunk that low to be involved in a drunk hit and run. But she's kind of also not surprised by it because so many other crazy things have happened with her and cars and drinking.
Also, I want to point out that as he's telling Chloe this, Chloe's like remembering the night. Like, her mom had a headache and things like that. And her mom was crying. And when she got home from this event, putting two and two together, and she's like, okay, yeah, I can definitely see this. And it's definitely possible. So then after he's done telling her all that, obviously they don't see a future together because, her mom killed his brother. So then they both just kind of move on with their lives. And not much later, but sometime later, they're living very different lives. They run into each other and just kind of say hi. The whole town, like, everybody knows what her mother did. And it's kind of sad that Chloe gets the crap end of the stick too, because she's a product of her mother. And so everyone's like, I wonder if she's an alcoholic. It must be hard, knowing your parent did something so terrible and your name's going to be attached to it forever. So then after that, the book also cuts to fishing with Jesse's dad. And they kind of just talk about Bry and how his dad feels like he failed him. And they didn't even try to learn sign language. They kind of just let Bry be. And they all kind of do like the what ifs. We should have done better. We should have done this different. And so then at the end, we find out that Jesse's still building the clock with his grandfather. He's carrying on that tradition with his grandfather, but he really doesn't know what to do with the clock anymore. And so he's just kind of like, well, we'll see. And that was the end of A Sudden Silence. Now we're going to discuss a little bit about the book and rate it. So Kelsey, you go first.
Okay. So I think this book deserves like a 3.5 out of 5. The author did a good job of putting us in a location. She did a really good job, like, we knew where we were at. Like, she used the ocean and the beach in the story. It wasn't just, oh, he just happens to live by the beach, and there was no involvement of that setting in the story. She involved the setting a lot in the story, actually. I feel like the characters were developed okay for such a short book. It's kind of hard to have much character development in that short amount of time. Like, in the beginning, Jesse was really indifferent towards Selbug, and then after Bry was killed, he was like even more indignant towards him and just really fed up with him and his begging for money and being drunk all the time and not really doing anything to better his life and bothering people and stuff. But then by the end of the novel, the reward money that Jesse's dad and his grandfather had offered to give to anyone who had any answers about the car and the driver that hit Bry, they donated that money to several different causes. And there was a businessman who had added $5,000 onto that $10,000 reward that Jesse's dad was offering and the grandfather was offering. And he donated his part to an organization that like gives work to homeless alcoholics and helps them recover, like helps them in their recovery by giving them jobs. And so Jesse tells Selbug about that program and, you know, tells him, I think you could really benefit from this. But he's saying, but Selbug's probably not going to do anything with that information. He's pretty happy on the beach. Like, he thinks he's just going to live his life the way he always has. So there's not really any character development for Selbug. He's not really any different by the end. Jesse, like I said, you know, kind of has a change of heart about Selbug, definitely a change of heart about Chloe because of what her mom did. And kind of the fact that she led Bry on too a little bit. Although she did say that she was going to tell Bry that she didn't like him back. But then he died in the accident. So, like, she never got the chance to. So I thought at least she kind of redeemed herself that way. For, you know, not liking Bry, but kind of making him think that she did. I liked that Jesse went surfing to kind of calm himself down and, like, just think and have some time to himself and be by himself. I thought that was interesting, like, the kind of reflections that he went into when he would go surfing by himself. Because he'd always go surfing at dawn and just enjoy the ocean and the movement of the waves and the sky and everything and the stillness and quiet, you know, the world just waking up around him. So that part I enjoyed. One thing I kind of wish was different, though, even though the author really used the location to her advantage, I feel like she could have done more with the time period, like making us sure of what time period it was. Because one thing I noticed throughout the story was that there was no cell phone. Every time Jesse called Chloe, it was on the house phone. When Bry got hit, someone had to go to a call box to call 911. This lady that stops Bry and the guy that he originally thought was Bry's, the guy that hit Bry, I forgot his name, the guy that works at the windmill. She threatened to go call the police on them. And she's like, I'm going to go back into my apartment and call the police on you if you don't, like, get out of here or whatever. So I'm guessing it was like maybe 90s, early 2000s, like super early 2000s, because there was no cell phones. And there was a couple other things that aren't coming to mind right now that made me kind of think of that time period. But I don't know. I just like a more specific time and place, and she kind of flopped on that a little bit. But this book was published in 2007, so that kind of makes sense why it would have been before cell phones. Not that we didn't have cell phones in 2007. Most people did by then, but it probably wasn't like, oh, let's set this book in a super current time period. It probably took place like a few years before the book actually was written and released. But other than that, it was a really enjoyable story. I like the twist at the end, you know, where it turns out to be Chloe's mom who hit Bry. And I think I appreciate it for what it was. It was a pretty short novel. I'm not used to reading things that are that short. And I think the author did a good job with what she was working with. I mean, she kind of put that constraint on herself, I guess, by not making the novel longer. But for being so short, it was pretty good, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like, it went through and got to the point, and like I wasn't left wanting really more. Like, everything was kind of tied up nicely by the end. All the questions got answered pretty much. And I feel like that was a good thing for a book so short that worked to its advantage. So yeah, 3.5 out of 5 for me.
I think I'm going to second that, Cal. So 3.5, maybe a 3.8. And let me tell you why. I've never read a book that was so short, but had so much in it. I guess I would say like everything in this book was intentional. Every character in this book was intentional. Every outing, the interactions with Jesse, like everything was, it was just there. Like you weren't going to be left with any questions. You didn't want more. Everything was in that 95 pages, and I appreciated that. There was a con for me. I really wanted to feel Jesse's mourning for his brother more, and it was more of a mystery romance, but I would give it a 3.8 out of 5 stars. I would definitely recommend to somebody who is looking to get back into reading. It's a short book, so you don't really need to put that much attention to it, but it was really good in my opinion. And I would definitely, if I was in a reading slump, I would pick it up again. I love the way the author put us in the setting. You're right, because I literally felt like I was in the car with Jesse, and I just felt like I was part of the story. And it's really hard for me to feel that way. Like I have to be connected to the book and like invested. And she didn't put so much detail into it where it was like, okay, get to the point, like a 400-500 page book. You know what I mean? Where there's like little details in there, but it was short, sweet, to the point, and I would recommend.
Yeah, I agree. And then like just a quick note on like what age group this is kind of targeted for. I think I looked it up on Amazon. Like I was just looking at some details of the book, and they had rated it for ages 12 and up. In terms of like the difficulty of the reading itself, like from a not academic standpoint, but like ability standpoint, it's appropriate. Like I think most 12-year-olds would be able to read this just fine and not encounter a bunch of words that they don't know what it means or like anything like that. So I think reading age is appropriate about 12. But so there's some stuff in this book that wouldn't fly today probably, but nothing really like R-rated. Like there was one line about like that he was looking at her, I think while she had her eyes closed, she was like laying on the couch with her eyes closed, and he was like intently like looking at her and gazing at her, and there was a line, something to the effect of there was something about touching her with his eyes, and that just kind of made me cringe a little bit.
Yeah, that was weird.
Yeah, that was poor choice of words on the author's part, I think. But yeah, considering the kind of overt nature, I guess, of Jesse's like infatuation with Chloe, and some of the descriptions that go into this book, I would say probably like an appropriate age range is probably closer to like 14, 15, maybe 16.
Right, I agree. Okay, so that is the first book that we read for our podcast. How exciting. I'm so excited to get started with the new one. So the next thing that we're going to put out is going to be on December 31st. It's called a bumper episode.
Yeah, so a bumper episode is a wild card episode where we discuss different topics like other than young adult fiction. So this first bumper episode is going to be about the band The Killers and their song When You Were Young. I'm really excited for that because The Killers is one of my favorite bands of all time. So I'm really excited to put that out into the world and hopefully have other Killers fans enjoy it too.
Okay, and so we also picked out the next book that we'll be reading and discussing for this podcast. And I went with, Kelsey picked the last book, so I'm picking this one. I went with You'll Be the Death of Me. And this is a fairly new book. It just came out November 2021. The age range for this book is 14 to 17 years old. But this book is a very hardy book. We have 336 pages. I know that A Sudden Silence only took 2 episodes, so we're definitely going to do more episodes on the new book, so stay tuned for that. So yeah, we'll let you know when that first episode hits. So check us out on our social media. We release new episodes every Friday. Thanks everyone for listening to this episode of Never Too Old for YA. Please follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook at Never2Old for YA. Everyone have a good and safe Christmas, and we'll see you for New Year's. Find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. Until next time, bye!